Hi, combination. It's Subhi, and welcome back to the show. It's hard to believe, but I started the podcast 3 years ago. And a few months into starting the podcast, I had been reflecting on other stuff that I wanted to do with the show, but I'm somebody who typically likes to add very slowly. In other words, I hadn't felt that I had given the podcast enough runtime to start adding towards it. And I actually was just recently listening to a podcast episode of a show that I really like, and it was focused on strength training. And I've been actually implementing this in my own routine, but one approach that's very common to strength training is progressive overload, whereby on week one, let's say you're doing 100 pounds by 5 reps, and then you try and increase a rep or a weight with each week. And so the next week you may do 105 by 5 reps, or you may do 100 by 6 reps, and you just keep on linearly progressing. And another approach is to stick with the same weight and continue to do more reps over time, but really stick with the weight for a while. So 100, rather than going from 100 by 5 to 100 by 6, and then moving on to 105 by 5, and then 105 by 6, and then 110 by 5, 110 by 6, or so on, you would do 100 until you can do 100 by 10 or 100 by 12. And then you would move to doing 125. And then you'd start there by doing 125 by 5, and then until you can do 10, and then you'd move up to, let's say, 150. And that conceptually has just entered my mind from a strength training point of view, and I've been trying it out on my bench. We'll see how it goes. But it was how I was thinking about the podcast, in that I'm like, I need to let this ride for a while before I start adding or changing, etc. And basically for the last 3 years, what I've done is commit to doing an episode a week, which I have 156 straight weeks, which was 3 years. And maybe a year ago, something like that, I thought about where I want to take the channel. So in this episode, I wanted to meditate on the last 3 years, go through some of the lessons that I learned, and also just talk about the direction that I want to take the show. And so, again, it's hard to believe that it's been 3 years now that I've been doing the show, and just a huge thank you and shout out to the people who listen to it. And the fact that people are taking a half hour, 45 minutes, I've done 3-part, 4-hour series. The fact that people are taking the time to listen to that is very meaningful to me. And one thing that I think about constantly is, yes, I'm doing this for my own goal, which is mastery, and for my own purposes of learning, but the fact that people listen to it definitely gives me the warm and fuzzies and warms the cookies of my heart. So huge shout out and thank you to the folks who listen to it. I'd love to hear feedback from you guys. That's something that when we get to the direction part of the show, I'm certainly going to talk about. I guess before I move into the lessons, I wanted to talk about a pretty significant life update, and that'll transition to the first lesson, sip of matcha. The edits will improve over time, and I'm certainly not somebody that's comfortable on camera by any means. And you may have noticed that by and large, the shorts that I post on LinkedIn are, if they include me, it's because the context of the video would have been impossible without some semblance of the question. But again, this will be part of the heavier weight that we were talking about earlier. Anyways, before I dive deep, I wanted to talk about a significant life update. And that is, about 6 weeks ago, my wife and I had our third child, and tremendously grateful she is recovering. Baby is doing well, starting to show some reaction. And I'm pretty sure he recognizes that I'm his dad. But I actually was never a fan of babies with my younger two. Not to go on a tangent here, but one of my favorite books around parenting and relationships is The Art of Loving by Eric Fromm. And he talks about the role of paternal love being a little bit more delayed response, in that for the first number of years of the child's life, they really need the motherly, nursing, unconditional love. No matter what the baby does, they get what they need. And then around age 5 and 6, let's say, the paternal love starts to become a lot more important as the child becomes more socialized and they need to understand you can't behave a certain way. Otherwise, you're not going to be well accepted into society, and or you're not going to be able to make meaningful relationships if you're, say, bratty or selfish or non-collaborative and so on and so forth. And so anyways, that was shaping my mindset a little bit. And so I had some bias, but with this kid, I feel like I've grown. And anyways, the long and short of it is your boy likes babies now. And I look back at my younger daughter's pictures now and I'm like, oh, they're so adorable. And I miss that. Big kind of shift in how I look at babies for sure. But going from 2 to 3, I have learned to trust other people's judgments despite my own feeling or confidence or even lack of confidence. So in some cases, I feel a lack of confidence and somebody will tell me like, hey, no, you got it. Don't worry about it. You did all the work. You're prepared. Like in the case of, let's say I did an Ironman last year. Even though I had prepped everything that I needed to, I think the longest run that I did before was a 20-mile run, and I did multiple centuries leading up to it. And the swim was going to be downriver, and I had done 90-minute, 2-hour swims and stuff and was feeling really good. Nutrition plan was set. I still felt like there's no shot. If you were to ask me, what is the likelihood that you finish? I would have given like a 20%. And so trusting my coach's judgment, no, you did the work, you got a pretty good chance, was helpful. But similarly, like in this case, some mentors telling me, hey, dude, the difference between 2 to 3 is pretty significant. So brace yourself. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, significant is, I would call 10% significant. So I'm sure it's different because you have more kids, but I heeded their advice. And in preparation for taking leave, I just really leaned into my process in terms of podcasting and tried to shake out more and more episodes. In other words, saving podcast acorns for when I needed them, and was able to take a full 6 weeks off basically, and had all those episodes ready, recorded, edited, scheduled such that I could really pull away. And I'm grateful that I was able to pull it off, but it wasn't because I focused on output. It was because I focused on process. The lesson that just keeps on coming back to me is focusing on the work process and not just the output. So my focus is putting out an episode every week. And my trick is that I focus on the process and not just the result. And so I've developed a system almost ritually that makes it all work. First, as far as scheduling goes, I use Calendly, and I either will record really early in the morning or late in the afternoon where I know I'm free, and my wife knows that I've blocked out certain times of the week for that. And those are no fly zones as far as scheduling things. And it avoids the, oh my God, like I am not the type of person that likes the back and forth of, are you free on Tuesday at 3? Or what about like whenever you have to schedule a meeting with somebody that's outside of your organization and you have to do the dance back and forth? That's something that is a pet peeve of mine. So nip that in the bud pretty early on. I use Calendly. Each guest, as they can schedule either an intro call if they have some discomfort with doing a podcast, because for some folks, if it's somebody that's very compliance focused or focused on a technical area, they may have done webinars and things like that, but they may not have done podcasts. So I have an intro option where we can get to know each other. I can walk them through the process. Sometimes they want to know like the topics and stuff like that. Others that are more familiar, we just go straight into recording. And right before a guest comes onto the show, they fill out a questionnaire covering everything from topics that they definitely want to discuss, things they definitely don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. They give me their bio, where sometimes I used to have to go and look for people's bio from like conferences that they did or whatever. And now I don't have to do that anymore because I have them give me the information that they would post it about themselves. And it's a 2-bird, 1-stone situation where I get what I need for the show notes, and they know that what's going in the show notes will be the way that they want it. So it makes my life easier, but it also means that I can introduce the guest in a way that makes them shine, whatever that means for them. The other thing that I do is some guests want to know exactly how we'll start the show, give me like the order of the questions so they don't feel like a deer in the headlights when we hit record. But I also send out a go live checklist, and I have it actually linked to the Calendly, where when they go and are scheduling, I have certain things that I would like them to consider as far as their equipment goes, making sure that they understand what software we're going to use, and then just where they can see the show come up, et cetera, and advice for how to make for the best recording, whether it's the positioning of the camera, the lighting of the room, the making sure notifications are off, et cetera. And so it's like a pre-flight checklist, if you will. You don't want any surprises 30,000 feet ahead. In terms of editing, which is a whole other beast, I used to manually edit like an hour of footage or an hour of recording, let's say, and I'd use tools like GarageBand or some audio editor. This was an area that used to take, if I recorded 30 minutes, let's say, I used to actually only record an hour plus episodes. And an hour would take me 3 to 4 hours to edit just audio. And it was like pulling teeth. So I did two things. One, I reduced the lengths of the episodes because I saw that people were dropping off after, say, 45 minutes. The less you record, the less you have to edit. But also, I started using different editing softwares till I found the one that I absolutely love. And the one that I use for everything now is Descript. It's absolutely amazing. They've introduced some AI tools that that help with show notes and things like that. Really good. I used Canva for creating the visuals and stuff because people do judge a podcast by its cover. Some really famous podcasts don't do the cover for each episode. It's something that I like to do. I think it's worthwhile. And one piece of advice that I was given by a creator friend of mine was to make sure to, when nobody's listening, and I try and make it not only something that is helpful for the guest, that's not only good content, but is also, helpful for the guest. One area that I'm still working on improving is promotion and getting the word out. I'll be honest, like I said before, putting myself out there doesn't really come naturally to me. I'd much rather be behind the mic or editing than be on social media, but I realize that promotion is obviously part of the process that needs more love if the show is going to grow. So brace yourselves for more LinkedIn posts, because if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. Whether or not it's podcasting or training for a triathlon or improving a relationship, to me, it's all process. Design inputs, design outputs, and more focus on the inputs than the outputs. And so the main takeaway is to think about your own projects. How can you tweak your processes to support the long-term sustainability? And one thing, I remember I met with a friend of mine who podcasts in something that's completely unrelated to industry. And we met for coffee, and I was asking him about cameras and mics and software. This is before the show started, and I was trying to get it all set up. And he was just like, listen, dude, you're my boy, and I'm going to spend the time to walk you through this. But I've literally had this conversation. He at that point had recorded hundreds of episodes. And he was just like, I've had this conversation about starting a podcast literally with dozens of people, to the point where now I charge people for discussing all of the ins and outs, because literally 0 people that I've had discussions with about starting a podcast have actually started it and remained consistent in a meaningful way. And that is just something that, even though it was just conversation over coffee, and he told me he wasn't going to charge me because we're tight, I just kept thinking about all those people that wanted to do a project, and then life got in the way. So I almost guarded my process as if it was the seedling that I just did not want to be the guy that spent time with my friend asking him how to start a podcast, what equipment to buy, what software to use, how to set up the RSS feed, all of that, having a nice big note in a notebook, and then come back and see him weeks and months later and him be like, so how's it going? Or, oh, I saw you put out 2 episodes and then you stopped. And so anyways, that's been the fire under my butt that has kept me from stopping. And I'm grateful that I've taken the approach of focusing on being consistent over burning out. I appreciate you all having been part of I want to say wild ride, but hasn't really been wild because I think just the way that I've approached the process has been as predictable can be. And whether you've been from the beginning or just hopped on and this is your first episode, I genuinely appreciate each and every one of you. I seriously, every time I post, I have episodes scheduled and I'll just go in and check on Wednesday to see did it actually post. And I always I'm genuinely surprised when I check at 6 a.m. and I'll see 30, 40 people have already listened to an episode, about auto injectors or about governance or primary packaging or LIO or whatever. It's very meaningful for me. So thank you. Now, I want to talk about the direction that I want to take the show. A little bit of foreshadowing is obvious that this episode is coming to you in video, and I typically don't do video, but it's an area that I want to get a lot more competent and comfortable at. And so I started a YouTube channel a while back. If you dig deep into the episodes or into the YouTube shorts that I posted, the first one that I posted was several months ago, and I've been toying around with the platform on and off. But again, in the spirit of consistency, I knew that pre-baby was probably a bad time to try and figure out a new tool. And so I took my time with that and decided that in conjunction with the 3-year is when I would transition into introducing the video podcast. I've been meditating quite a bit and really thinking about where I prefer to focus my energy. There's one of my favorite books it's called Mastery by Robert Greene. And not to get into the weeds and details of his own mastery process, but obviously when you talk about mastery or gaining competency in an area, there has to be some guided element of a learning process where there's some hand holding. And at first the hand holding is tight until the hand holding is loose. And then you start to try and learn on your own and then show your work and make sure you're okay. And then you just start working on your own. And then eventually you start being the one who holds the hand of someone else. And again, not to get into all the weeds, I would suggest you certainly read Robert Greene's book if you're mastery focused, because he talks a lot about how one can take a very pragmatic, practical, stepwise approach to mastery if they feel like they have a life task that they feel like they want to put the effort towards mastery against. And the long and short of it is, for the last 3 years, I feel like I've taken this expanded active apprenticeship whereby, yeah, I've posted some solo episodes here and there, but the bulk, say 90+% of the content that I've created has been interviews. You may also have noticed if you go into the YouTube channel that the channel is called not the Combinate Podcast, but Let's Combinate. And this is a change that I have been wanting to make for a while, but just wanted to wait for the right time to shift. And the podcast will continue to post on Spotify and stuff like that. I want to eventually get to the point where there is more of a 50-50 split. And I think that video takes a little bit of the edge off, because just looking at how I myself consume YouTube, if I see I'm either going to click on an hour podcast on YouTube or a 5 to 10 minute video. It's atypical for me to click a 28-minute video, just how I operate. I'm sure others are the same way. And I'm going to be playing around with the pieces of content that I create. We'll obviously commit to continuing the one piece of content a week, whether that's a podcast or some kind of informative video, but expect a little bit of variance in the next few months as I find my footing. This podcast has been super enjoyable. I find that it gives me a tremendous amount of energy. And I feel like, just given the amount of consistency that I've applied to it over the last 3 years, I've earned the ability to try and, yes, continue once a week on Wednesday at 5 a.m. Something will post, but what that thing is will vary maybe over the next 3 months. And I'll check in with you guys. Like I said, there's a thinking and planning element to this, and then there's a doing element to it. So I'm going to try some things out. And obviously this video was not the cleanest edit, but if you go back to episode 1, the quality well, I'll say, instead of using the word quality, I don't want to make Philip Crosby mad. I'll use the word fidelity. The fidelity of that track isn't the highest and has improved over time. And similarly, this is video 1, and we'll check in at video 156, hopefully in the coming years. To close, the other thing that I do want to talk about is just the interaction with the listeners, the people who week in and week out listen to the show. I would genuinely love to hear from you guys. I've already heard from some of you, have gotten suggestions on guests, suggestions on how I can improve the podcast, but would love to hear from you on one, where can I improve the show? What episodes you've enjoyed most, guests and topics that you want to learn and hear from. And some of the best guests that I've ever had on the show are actually listeners. I've had a couple people who have reached out via the contact me page on my website, which is letscombinate.com. And they've said, hey, been a listener of the show for a while, love it, and just wanted to offer, I'm focused in this area. Can I come on and talk about it? And definitely feel free to reach out if you feel like there's something you got to get off your chest. And you as a listener taking maybe a more active role, and together we can simplify by combinating. See you, everybody. I really appreciate you listening in.